The forest was alive, humming with the whispers of nature. Sunlight filtered through the towering trees, casting golden streaks across the earth. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, and the distant calls of birds echoed through the air. It felt peaceful, safe. A father and his son wandered through the underbrush, their eyes scanning the ground for ginseng. But peace in the woods is never promised. Unseen eyes lurked beyond the trees, watching, waiting. And as the boy took one careless step away from his father, the forest itself seemed to shift, an invisible force stirring in the silence. One step, then another. The boy drifted from his father, eyes fixed on the ground, unaware. But the forest noticed. The wind that once danced through the leaves stopped. The birds that sang fell silent. The air thickened, pressing against him like unseen hands. He exhaled, but the sound barely reached his own ears. Something had changed. Something was wrong. A creeping unease slithered up his spine, cold and relentless. He stood still, listening, waiting. His own heartbeat now the loudest sound, and then a flicker in the corner of his eye. Something moved, fast, too fast. He turned sharply, eyes scanning the trees. Nothing, just shadows stretching unnaturally in the fading light. But he knew. Something had been there. Something fast. His breath hitched, heart pounding in his ears. The forest, once familiar, now felt alien. Wrong. A suffocating stillness wrapped around him. His instincts screamed, "You are not alone." He swallowed hard, forcing himself to move. But every step felt heavier, as if unseen hands clung to him. Then, from the depths of the trees, a flicker, a shape, not a man, not an animal, something else. Watching, waiting, and it was getting closer. The trees felt taller now, their trunks stretching endlessly into the sky. The light had faded, but the sun hadn't set. Shadows pooled at his feet, shifting, crawling. The weight of unseen eyes pressed against him, heavy and suffocating. He wanted to run, but where? The air was thick, unmoving, trapping him in its grasp. His fingers twitched, his breath shallow. Then, a sound. No, not a sound. A presence. It was near. Closer than before, hidden just beyond the trees, watching, studying. The boy's skin prickled. He wasn't lost, he had been led here. And whatever brought him wasn't human. Then it came. A scream. Not human. Not animal. A sound that ripped through the air, bending reality itself. It wasn't just heard, it was felt, vibrating through his bones, shaking the very trees. His body seized, his mind fractured. The scream was a vortex, swallowing everything. His thoughts, his will, his soul. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe, trapped in a silent, paralyzing terror. The forest warped, twisting like a nightmare, and the darkness moved. It rushed toward him, swallowing the world in its path. And then, nothing. No sound, no sight. Just blackness. Endless, suffocating blackness. And he was falling. Nothing remained. No trees, no wind, no sky, just blackness. Endless and alive. He was floating, weightless, yet sinking deeper into the abyss. The silence wasn't empty. It breathed, pulsing with something unseen. Shadows slithered, coiling around him, whispering without words. He tried to scream, but there was no sound. His voice stolen, his body paralyzed. Then, movement. Not his own. Something loomed in the void, featureless, yet staring, watching. It had found him. It had taken him, and as the last fragments of reality slipped away, one final, chilling thought surfaced. He was never meant to leave this place. Light, blinding, sterile light. A steady beeping filled the air, rhythmic, real. He gasped, lungs aching as if they had forgotten how to breathe. His body felt heavy, numb, except for the sharp pain in his arm. Bandaged, broken. He blinked. White walls, a hospital room. He was back. But how? His father sat beside him, eyes haunted, relief and fear tangled in his gaze. "We found you," he whispered. "A mile away, face down in the runoff." A mile? He couldn't answer, he didn't know. The only thing he did know was that something had let him go. He stood at the forest's edge, staring into the darkness between the trees. The wind barely stirred the leaves, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. He was safe now, wasn't he? His father's voice called from behind, but he didn't turn. The trees were watching. It was watching. He could feel it, patient, waiting. It had let him go once, but not without a warning. The silence was a trap, a whisper of something beyond human understanding. He stepped back. He would never return. But deep within the trees, unseen and unmoving, it would never stop watching. The village was quiet, nestled in the rolling Irish countryside. But beyond it lay something far older, far darker. At the end of a narrow, winding lane stood the forest. Tall, gnarled trees packed so tightly that even moonlight struggled to break through. It had stood for centuries, planted by a long-dead British landlord whose family now rested in forgotten graves beneath the rotting leaves. The villagers spoke in whispers about the land, about the things that lurked beyond the trees. Some said the forest was cursed. Others said it was haunted. But all agreed on one thing: never enter after dark. Deep within the forest, hidden beneath a canopy of twisted branches, lay a forgotten clearing. The air was thick with an unnatural silence, as if the trees themselves were listening. At its center stood an ancient stone altar, its surface scarred with strange, unholy symbols. Decades ago, this place had been a gathering ground for something sinister, a cult that whispered in the dark, their chants carrying through the trees. It was said they sought power through blood, their victims chosen for their golden hair. Though the rituals had ceased, the echoes remained, trapped within the earth, waiting to be heard again. The forest path was silent, save for the soft rustling of dead leaves beneath cautious steps. The air was cold, thick with an unseen presence. A lone horse stood at the edge of the trail, its breath visible in the frigid night. Its muscles tensed, eyes wide with terror, refusing to move forward. No matter how much it was coaxed, it would not pass the graves. Old, forgotten stones covered in ivy and moss. Something lingered there, something the animal sensed but its rider could not see. The silence stretched, then, faintly, a whisper, barely audible, carried on the wind. The horse bolted. Halloween night. The moon hung low, a sickly orange glow casting twisted shadows through the trees. At the forest's edge, 3 boys stood, bottles in hand, their laughter masking unease. The trees before them loomed like silent sentinels, their branches curling inward as if to swallow them whole. The villagers' warnings echoed in their minds, but curiosity burned brighter than fear. Deeper inside, the air grew heavier, thick with something unseen. Then, a distant sound, a low, resonant bang from deep within the trees. The laughter stopped. The boys exchanged wary glances. Something was out there, and it was waiting. The scream tore through the night, raw and agonizing, shattering the eerie silence. It didn't sound human. It was something else, something wrong. The boys froze, their breath hitching, eyes darting through the darkness. The trees stood impossibly still, as if listening. Then a rustling, slow, deliberate. Something was moving just beyond their sight. "We need to go," Jim whispered. But his words barely escaped his lips before another sound cut through the air. A low, guttural breath, too close. The shadows shifted. A shape loomed between the trees, watching, waiting. The forest, once silent, now felt alive. And it was closing in. The hut stood in the darkness, barely holding together, its walls made of brittle, uneven sticks. The boys had seen it before, but tonight it felt different, wrong. The air around it was thick, suffocating, as if the forest itself was watching. Then, movement, a flicker of something inside, a soft rustling like fingers dragging across wood. The boys held their breath. Bob's voice was barely a whisper. "Did you see that?" Between the gaps in the sticks, a pair of eyes stared back, cold, unblinking. The silence stretched. Then, from within the hut, came the slow, deliberate sound of breathing. The path stretched ahead, muddy and slick beneath the boys' hurried steps. Then, movement. A figure stood motionless in the center of the trail, tall and draped in a long black coat. Its face was lost to shadow, its posture unnatural, as if it didn't quite belong. The air around it seemed heavier, pressing against their chests. "Did anyone see that?" the boy whispered. The others only nodded, too afraid to speak. Then, without a sound, the figure moved, gliding, not walking, parallel to them. It wasn't running, yet it kept pace. A cold dread settled in. Whatever it was, it wanted them to follow. The boys ran, their footsteps pounding against the damp earth, breath coming in ragged gasps. But no matter how fast they moved, the figure in black kept pace, silent, effortless. Shadows twisted and stretched as they weaved between the trees, the undergrowth clawing at their legs. Branches snapped behind them, but not from their own movement. Something else was there, watching, hunting, a glimpse between the trees. Too tall, too still. Then ahead, an opening in the trees, their only way out. They sprinted toward it, but just as they neared the edge, a deep guttural laugh echoed from right behind them. The boys skidded to a stop, their bodies frozen in terror. That laugh, it wasn't human. Low, guttural, vibrating through the trees like a voice from the grave. Slowly, they turned. The figure stood just beyond the tree line, its form barely visible in the shifting mist. It hadn't run. It hadn't even moved. Yet somehow it was there, watching, waiting. The air around them felt suffocating, pressing against their chests like unseen hands. Then, another sound. Closer this time, the crunch of leaves, the snap of a twig. Not ahead, not behind, but right beside them. And then, the breathing began. The bus grinds to a stop, its engine groaning like a dying beast. A rusted sign barely clings to its post, its faded letters spelling out the camp's name. Scratched, defaced, almost warning. Thick fog coils between the towering trees, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky. The air is unnaturally still. A lone girl steps off the bus, her boots sinking into the damp earth. The camp counselors stand motionless in the distance, their eyes hollow, their faces drawn with exhaustion or fear. Something feels wrong. The girl shivers. Somewhere in the forest, unseen, something stirs. And it's waiting. The paper feels brittle in her hands, its yellowed edges curling with age. The ink is dark, almost rust-colored, the words pressing down like a curse. No speaking ill of the camp, no wandering alone. The camp is not responsible for your death. Her pulse quickens. A shadow looms over her shoulder, a counselor watching in silence. Their face is unreadable, their fingers twitching slightly. The cabin creaks, as if something unseen is listening. Outside, the wind howls, but the trees remain perfectly still. She swallows hard. Signing this contract feels less like a rule, and more like a warning. The cabin is dim, filled with the stale scent of old wood and mildew. 5 beds line the room, but none of the campers speak. The air is thick with tension. The jock leans against the wall, arms crossed, eyes darting to the window, as if expecting something to appear. The shy girl clutches her blanket, her gaze fixed on the floor. The pick-me girl's smile falters, and the nerd adjusts his glasses nervously. Near the window, the girl in grunge style stares into the darkness. Beyond the glass, the forest shifts, its shadows deepening as something watches. The counselor's voice is low, almost a whisper. Lock the doors, shut the blinds, stay quiet at night. His hands tremble as he demonstrates the locks, his eyes flickering toward the window. The campers exchange uneasy glances. Outside, the forest looms, its trees too still, too expectant. The cabin walls creak, the sound almost deliberate. A chill creeps into the air. The girl near the window feels it first, an invisible weight pressing against her chest. The counselor exhales shakily, stepping back. No matter what you hear, don't open the door. Then without another word, he's gone. The silence lingers. The knock comes softly at first, gentle, almost testing. The cabin is silent, the air thick with unease. Another knock, harder this time. The jock stirs, moving toward the window. Don't, the grunge girl whispers, her pulse pounding. The pick-me girl scoffs, laughing. Coward. The blinds snap open. Nothing. Just empty darkness. But then, a breath. Fog spreads across the glass. A handprint appears. Long fingers. Too many joints. The jock stumbles back, face pale. The blinds slam shut. The wind outside is dead. No footsteps retreat. Whatever knocked is still there. Still waiting. And now, it knows they're awake. 2 a.m. The air is heavy, suffocating. Then the scratching starts, slow, deliberate, carving into the wooden door. A voice slithers through the crack, warping and twisting, layering familiar tones. "Let me in," it croons, a sickly chorus of stolen voices. The grunge girl grips a dagger, her hands shaking. The shadows in the cabin seem to stretch, reaching. The scratching deepens, jagged claw marks forming on the door. "Let me in," it repeats, more insistent, more eager. The other campers lie frozen in their beds, breathing shallow. The doorknob rattles. Something knows they're awake, and it isn't leaving. A scream shatters the silence. Not human. Not entirely. The campers jolt awake, hearts pounding. The grunge girl and the nerd grab whatever makeshift weapons they can find. A rusted flashlight, a pocket knife. The night air is thick with something rancid, metallic. Stepping outside, their breath catches. Scarlet streaks stain the ground, leading from a nearby cabin into the forest's black maw. The door hangs open, splintered, the room inside torn apart. Blood drips from the walls, smeared in patterns that make no sense. The counselors stand in eerie silence, their faces unreadable. Someone was here. Someone isn't anymore. Daylight does nothing to chase away the dread. Whispers ripple through the camp, names spoken in hushed tones, faces missing from roll call. Jessie never came back from the beach. The shy girl's bed is untouched, her belongings eerily undisturbed. The jock? Gone, dragged from his own mind into some unseen nightmare. The grunge girl and the nerd exchange looks, the same silent question hanging between them. Who's next? The counselors avoid eye contact, their smiles forced, their hands shaking. The forest hums in the distance, hungry. The camp feels smaller now, like the trees are inching closer. Watching. Waiting. The lake is still. Too still. The surface, once rippling with life, is now a black mirror reflecting a sky that seems wrong. A lone kayak drifts near shore, its hull punctured, smeared with something dark. No sign of Emily, Katie, or Josh. Just the eerie quiet. The absence of voices that should be laughing, splashing. The counselors whisper among themselves, stealing nervous glances at the tree line. The grunge girl grips the nerd's arm. "We have to leave." He nods, swallowing hard. But as they turn away, something shifts beneath the water. Something pale, something watching. And then, it sinks.